Welcome everybody to this Belbin webinar where we will be looking at making the learning stick, sustainable behaviour change for real teams. My name's Jo Keeler and I'm the Managing Director here at Belbin, and I'm joined by the wonderful Victoria Brown, who is our Head of R&D here at Belbin. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. Yes, it's being recorded and you will be sent a recording immediately afterwards via the StreamYard platform. It's quite a small email. You might miss it. It might go into junk. And we will also send out a further email either later on this afternoon or tomorrow morning. It will have the recording, but also all the links to everything that we reference during this next 45 minutes. So please look out for that one because it's probably going to be a little bit more informative. We'd love your questions. Please do have a conversation in the chat. There's normally some really great stuff in there. If you do have any questions, we will try and get to those as we go along. If not, we will get to them at the end. We've got the fantastic Tracy Eek, our marketing manager, in the background there, sorting out all of the questions and comments and seeing which ones are the most useful. Okay. Lots of people joining from all over the world. It's because Belbin is a global language. Okay, so this is a bit strange, to be honest with you. I thought I'd be really straightforward. This is our first webinar since the passing of Dr. Meredith Belbin on the 6th of March at the fantastic age of 98. He is the father of Team Roles, but is also our workmate, and we are missing him incredibly, actually. We're missing, we're just missing him a lot, as you would a work colleague you've worked with for many years. But we're really committed now. We're even more doubly committed, I would say, to really ensure that the legacy of Meredith continues and people understand and use the team role theory and more. He was more than just team roles, to really help organizations thrive, not now, but in the future as well. So we miss him terribly. And thank you so much for all of the comments that have been made to us on email, in the post and everything. We really, really do appreciate it. Okay, he'd say, come on, Josie, he'd say. Any person who's allowed to use my proper name, Josie, come on, crack on. Okay, back to the webinar. So we've been looking over the last 3 webinars at an article by McKinsey, and it's here, and there will be a link to it in the email. Here we go. It's called Go Teams, When Teams Get Healthier, the Whole Organization Benefits. And we have been looking at this over the series of 3. Don't worry, they're all standalone. You don't have to watch the other 2 to understand what we're talking about today. And we've really been looking at that from the perspective of Belbin and also from a usability. What does this mean? How can we actually use this information that McKinsey has put forward? Basically, what they have looked at, the whole paper, really can be summed up in the fact that team effectiveness is less art, more science. Less art, more science. Less gut feel, more actual data. And obviously, this is what we do at Belbin. We've been looking at the data. Meredith and his team looked at the data back in the 60s, the 70s, and we've continued to look at it ever since. So it's fantastic to hear McKinsey saying this, that how important it is to get the data behind what makes an effective team. Vicky, would you like to take this next bit further?
Absolutely. So in the first of our series, we were looking at Apollo syndrome. Meredith discovered that putting lots of high intellect individuals together didn't work, and you can catch up on that and on the webinar that goes with that article. And then last time we were looking at those key sort of health drivers for team success. This time it's really about how do we give teams that understanding that helps that learning to stick. So there's obviously the data, as Jo says, there's the discovery, but then how do we ensure that we turn that into sustainable results? And so that's what we're going to be really focusing on in this session. So in the article, McKinsey defined team effectiveness as the collective capacity to sustainably deliver results, and they're reporting on their research. So in the interest of sort of narrowing down what they mean by team effectiveness, this is a helpful sort of definition. Obviously, we can argue other sort of elements that creep in, but just for the sake of this paper, that's what we're looking at. So we start really with another myth. So we had the myth about Apollo syndrome, and when we're looking at what teams need to do, the myth that McKinsey present here is that that there's not a best practice playbook for team effectiveness that every team should adopt. So there's no one size fits all solution. It'd be very tidy if there were, but obviously we know that can't be the case because there are so many variables, aren't there, when it comes to teams. What is the team there to do? What's the purpose of the team? Who is in that team? What are the objectives? What's changing in the team? So it's really difficult to find something that you can. Well, it's impossible, I'd say, to find something where you can rubber stamp and say, job done. Our team is effective. It's high performing. Tick. So McKinsey go on to talk about two types of interdependence that we have in teams. So the first of those is outcome interdependence. So our sort of teams' outcomes and the success, do they depend on individuals, or do they depend on the team as a whole? So does the team sort of succeed or fail together? So that's the first sort of idea that they looked at. And secondly, task interdependence. So the extent to which one person's work or workflow affects somebody else. Can I do I have to wait until you've finished your piece for this to work, or how do we sort of coordinate and work together? How do we need to collaborate, and how does that sort of affect our effectiveness? And so what McKinsey found, which is really interesting, is that teams actually, almost half of teams, didn't agree. They didn't even agree on these types of interdependence. So obviously, it's very difficult then to move forward into how to work more effectively. You need that sort of initial agreement on how interdependent are we? What are our sort of measurements for success? So looking at the different sort of team types, these are straight from the McKinsey article, and they've given these sort of useful examples that relate to sporting teams. So you can read it sort of in detail in the article. We won't go into too much detail here. But looking at this, I sort of thought that the cycling team is a little bit like your sales team, perhaps. So they've got an overall strategy, but they're all sort of circling around the velodrome with their individual, their personal best and their sort of goals and targets that they have to hit. So they are sort of working together, and they might have sort of overall sort of team outcomes, but there's sort of individual efforts, individual sort of decisions to be made there as well. The relay team, fairly sort of self-explanatory. One sort of, there's an individual performance, and then you hand over to the next. And then there's the rowing team, where we have to be sort of working in tandem in order to progress. So we need to be coordinated. And what sort of happens is those key drivers that we were talking about last time, those are common across all of those types. But once we get into the second two kind of types, you see other things coming in. So it stands to reason that if you've got the rowing team style, where you've got those high levels of interdependence, you're going to need more role definition, because if you need people to work in a sort of a coordinated fashion, you need to know what each person's doing. There's not so much of a high element of sort of individual and asynchronous work going on. So McKinsey talk then, and we will sort of pause for questions in a minute. I realise I'm just sort of working through this first bit before we go on to the more of the sustainable behaviour change. McKinsey talk about building teams that are greater than the sum of their parts, and I think this is maybe something that we might see quite often. But I think what's helpful here is really drilling down into the detail. What does that mean? And I think they use those sort of key drivers, and they suggest that leaders need to have this holistic view of the team. They need to understand where the team is excelling and maybe failing with those behaviours. And where you might have a perception gap. So they describe a perception gap that often plagues teams when they know that certain behaviours are important, but they aren't exhibiting them. And actually, McKinsey talks so much, don't they, about behaviours, not just those key drivers, but a real focus on behaviour. Where are those gaps? And also, as I said earlier, where do the team agree on what those what their interdependencies are? Do they even agree about their sort of contract for how they work together? So I think that's a really important place to start, because it's nice to talk about a team that's greater than the sum of its parts, but how do we sort of get there? What does that mean?
What does it mean, indeed? I mean, and this is, the next bit, the sort of ending point really of the paper by McKinsey is that they have looked at this. They've given us lots of data, they've given us lots of analysis, and then they've left it with 4 defining points, 4 actions that were really going to help your team succeed. And that's what we're going to look at now. We're going to concentrate on these 4 practical points for your teams to build in that sort of sustainable behavioral change. So if we just go to the first suggestion that they made, is take a hard look in the mirror. And I'll just read directly from it here. So they recommend that team diagnostics are an excellent way to get a baseline on key behaviours that will lead to healthier ways of working by uncovering the areas where the team is already operating well and identifying those in greater need of improvement. So what we're looking here is getting a baseline. We really need to look at baseline data to see what we already have. And to find what we already have, we need to start with the individual, because we need to find out those component parts of the team. I've looked at my notes here and I've just written, how good is the mirror? Which I think I wrote down in a moment of inspiration, but have almost forgotten what I was trying to say. Is that they say take a hard look in the mirror, but obviously it's only going to reflect ourselves back. So we need to look at other things other than just the mirror. We need to be able to build in an element of feedback and an element of 360-degree feedback into that. In fact, McKinsey go on and say there are several tools to help with that self-awareness, and 360 feedback is one of them. Of course, many of you will use 360 feedback in perhaps a separate sort of tool or a separate part. But here at Belbin, we think it's a really useful, you're talking about teams and you're talking about behaviour. To get feedback on that behaviour is really, really critical. So we can start really with the data, the raw data from a Belbin perspective. And we know that the most successful teams have access to 9 distinct clusters of behavior, and we call those team roles. And we can find out which of those distinct clusters of behavior, which of those team roles that we feel that we have strengths in, that we feel that we are playing to our best effect when we're working with other people. But that's just our self-perception. You may think that you are the strongest plant who's coming up with all the original ideas and is being very innovative and is coming up and solving all of the hard problems. And that's great. But you need to have it validated by the people who are working with you in the team. Are they seeing those ideas, or do they value other contributions that you're making? And this is why it's so important that the data, the starting point we use is behavior here, because it is observable. It's tangible. People can see it, they can feed back on it. McKinsey doesn't talk about personality, it talks about behavior, and this is where we need to start. So we start by taking a hard look at various mirrors, one would argue, and we start with the self. What strengths do we have individually? And then we start on the strengths of the team. So once we have the data for the individuals, putting that together and saying, okay, as a team, like they say, where are there gaps? Where are there overlaps? Where do we need to improve? this gives a wonderful snapshot of that. Also, what type of culture does that mean that we are as a team? Are we a culture where we're perhaps very high in maybe implementer, completer, finisher, specialist behaviours? Would that mean that we're open for change? Or perhaps we're in a team which is culturally really high on the shapers, resource investigators, is getting stuff done really quickly and doesn't stop changing. These bits of insights into how your team is already performing will really help understand what you need to do to go up a level. Really need to know how to make that go further.
Absolutely. And we've talked about perception gap. And actually, when you moved from that individual to the team, you can see if you've just got self-perception data, you are essentially carrying those sort of perception gaps forward into the team analysis. So that's why it's so important to have that. You know, if you're talking about sustainable change, it's got to be something where you're starting by analysing the team as it really is, and taking that forward, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to sort of build from that strong base, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The data that starts has to be correct. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to give you a scenario. So at our conference last year, the CEO of Caravella Coffee presented the work that they have been doing. So why did they do that? Well, at Caravella Coffee, Alejandro, who's the CEO and a co-founder, had set 16 members of the leadership team a task. And that was to devise the strategies, the measures and the goals that would take the company forward to achieve their objectives in order to really grow and realise its aims as a coffee company. And that the leadership team were given the autonomy and responsibility for running with this task, not just the CEO and the co-founder, but the leadership team as a whole were given the opportunity to say, right, we know what we need to do, let's go and do it. And over the 6 months, they were expected to make progress and report back. And it was acknowledged that as a group of 16, they would have challenges, but the hope was that they'd make use of committees to move forward with the tasks so that they could report back on their collective progress. 6 months passed. No progress had been made. A year passed. Still no progress. So let's start at the raw data. Let's start at the starting point. Let's reflect the mirror onto the team that they had. This is their leadership team. No progress is being made. Can anybody, perhaps if you've got an understanding of Belbin, can anybody understand why no progress was being made in this respect? If you'd like to put your any answers? I mean, this was brilliant because at the Belbin conference last year, this went up, and it's a collection of over 130 people, all of who use Belbin on a regular basis, and there was a collective gasp and then a nodding of heads. Oh yeah, no, I understand why. Oh my goodness, yes. It was really interesting to see just how one visual can communicate so much. Absolutely, no implementers, a lack of implementers. And what are the strengths of an implementer? Well, the strengths of an implementer are the fact that they plan the work, they organize the work, they translate all of this into measurable steps and processes that need to happen. So the coordinators organize the people, the implementers organize the work. They're very practical, they're very hardworking, they're also incredibly loyal to the organizations that they work for. They put the good of the organization above the need for any sort of reward. So what we have here is a very obvious, we've got those social roles, but no implementer. They didn't know how to go forward. Such a great example of why it's so important to look at the baseline. What are the objectives and what do we have? What have we looked into the mirror? Okay, and Rob's just put, and any one person to creatively think their way out of this mess. Absolutely. You see, once you understand the language of Belbin, you can see this, can't you? And immediately little sort of pieces come in. this was really their aha moment. The case study is on the website if you can't quite see the screen, but we just wanted to put it in there for you. Yes, the implementer wasn't there. So this finding explained why ideas and initiatives remained unexecuted, creating a key learning moment for everybody. It explained the lack of progress. So this is a really key part of the reason why you need to start by looking in the mirror. Start with what you have. Look at where your strengths are. Look at where your weaknesses are. Okay. We're now going to go over to the second point that McKinsey talk about. And they talk about is how important it is to make the changes stick. So once the teams understand the behaviours they need to emphasise and where they're struggling, what do they do about it? How do we make change stick? And my goodness, we come across this all of the time. Oh, we've done a Belbin workshop, tick. Did anything change? We need to make sure that we keep referring back to Belbin and we use the language of Belbin to ensure that we really do have proper change. It's not just a tick box exercise. We hear a lot from organizations like, oh, yes, we do this. We've got colors, we've got letters, we've got whatever, and we've done that. Okay, so how did you make that really integrate within the organization, and how did you make that stay as part of that organization? If you look at it in terms of the team objectives, this is what we recommend very much at Belbin is, you start with the individual. So to make it stick, you need to start with the individual. You get the feedback, you get feedback from others, finding out those gaps. And we have those discussions on a one-to-one basis. We then put that information into the team, where are the gaps, where are the overlaps, what contributions are needed in terms. I'll put the team objectives in the middle because you should always be relating to the objectives of the team. Who's needed, what's needed, and then to form, this is one thing we love to do, is to form an individual and team contract. Agree ways in which we are going to work together using the language of Belbin to help inform the future, help inform how we're going to hit those objectives.
Yeah, and I think that's, as you were saying, Jo, that's where you need a team tool that connects the individual, the team, and the work. Because if you're on a team away day, and you have all these, you find out all these insights about who people are and whatever it might be, but once you get back to the office or wherever you work, it's really sort of keeping hold of that information and sort of turning it into something that relates to what you're doing, isn't it? That relates to your work. And that's where you need a language that actually talks about working styles, how we communicate, how we sort of relate to one another, but with a view to what does that mean for how we're going to work and the kinds of work that we're going to be doing. And when you have that lead, I think it's much easier to take it back into the workplace and sort of thread in that more sustainable change.
Absolutely. I really love how you're linking that back to the work. And that's the key element, isn't it? Is that whatever you're doing, if you've got a team tool, it's always relating to the work of the team. I'll make sure that we put a link in. We've got a couple of great articles, actually, which I think people would find useful. One of them is we've done Belbin. So what do we do now? Which is a list of ways to really embed Belbin within the team's everyday work. And we also have one called the social contract, which is some ideas of ways in which you can work together as a team. And you're putting some rules in place or some best practice to be able to do that. One thing that we do is it's a constant reevaluation. So every team meeting, let's start there by looking at the contributions that people will probably make in the team and how they need to perhaps adapt those. So the objectives of the team meeting are kept, are kept, full stop. I often talk about the time I went down to New Zealand and I was with a team and they'd managed to cut their meeting times by 50% just by looking at their team roles beforehand and going, oh, okay, we've got the social roles here. Who's going to take a social hat off and play the implementer role, because we need to make sure that this is organised. These sorts of things really do make an impact, and you're constantly reinforcing that language as you go through. Appraisals, we use KISS, not as in the keep it simple, stupid, but as in what are you going to keep doing? What are you going to improve doing? What are you going to stop? And what are you going to start doing within terms of those Belbin team roles? So which behaviours are you going to keep contributing? Which ones do you want to be better at? Because we can always make a better contribution. There's always room for growth and for learning. Which ones are we going to stop? That's really not helpful. Which ones are we going to start? The team really needs me to be this. So we're constantly looking at that and reviewing the ways that we work together. Are we regressing? We've all seen it. We all start with best intentions. But how can we stop going back to where we were? Because change is difficult, isn't it? You have to keep at it. We need to review that. And of course, change happens anyway. The objectives of teams change, the team members change, the leaders may change, the stakeholders, the timescales. There's change happening all of the time. So we need to ensure that we understand that and that the team changes with that. The team isn't a static, keeping still part of the organization. It should be flexible, organic, and change with the needs and the external environment as well. I just talked about contracts there. This is part of, if you had two individuals working together, this is a working relationships report. It's a great prompt. It puts the data of two people together. And you can start to have that conversation of how do we work best? Where are we similar? Where are we different? How do we hold each other accountable? I really like that question. It gets you to really think about this. Vicky and I do this on a regular basis because we have such different team role profiles. We're both, between us, we've got most roles covered, to be fair, but we do things incredibly differently. And we sometimes, need to just stop and take note and just remind each other where our strengths are. And then we have, Vicky can quite happily say, Jo, your RI is going in overload at the moment, overdrive. And I go, okay, I'll stop. Or I may go, oh, your CF's showing a little bit. So it's quite nice that we have that relationship because we've been working together for a long time, and there's trust there as well. But it didn't happen overnight. These things take time. But to have those conversations is a really, really good starting point.
And I
To
think,
keep short.
to encourage people to be having those conversations within the team, so that the onus is not always on the manager to be sort of sorting out interpersonal sort of difficulties. Obviously, Belbin is only going to cover so much, but I think having this sort of depersonalized language that you can use to talk about, how you might work together, those team role opposites that are often sources of difficulty for people. Just knowing that as a first step. There's obviously then what do we do about it? How are we going to handle it? But being armed with that knowledge is so valuable, I think, for pairs as well as teams. And it just, as I say, it just takes some of that off the shoulders of managers and empowers people. I think, like you say, Jo, it's accountability, isn't it? We can manage the way we work together, and I think that's quite that can be really constructive for people. It can go from being a source of sort of difficulty to being something that we can couch it in this language, and it makes sense to us, and we can address it, and it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be sort of on a very personal level. We can talk about it in terms of our behaviours and our work.
You've just reminded me, Vicky, actually, of another case study. So sorry if I'm looking at my other screen. We'll come to this case study in a minute, actually, but there's part of it which I hadn't brought up. So we'd worked with an energy company. They didn't want us to use their name. Fine. And they're going through a period of change, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what they found is they found some observable outcomes. It's just what you said. I'm just going to raise that, is that they said managers spend much less time managing interpersonal relationships because team members are aware of their own strengths and allowable weaknesses. That's really powerful, isn't it? Really, if you want it to stick, you need to embed it, and you need to be encouraging. Everything needs to be encouraged. So that's really interesting. Thank you. And now I'm on a different state. Right, here we go. And again, if don't worry, we'll give you the case study so you can see the writing slightly bigger. But this is Alejandro, who is the co-founder and CEO of Caravella Coffee. And I think it's really interesting. He says, if we want things to stay as they are, things will have to change. We live in an increasingly complex world, and we all need to change and transform each other constantly. And I think Belbin is a great tool to do that. It gives you the language and the understanding to continue to make sure that it's not just a one-off, to continue to make sure that it's not a job done tick box. It's to make sure that your teams are really making a difference and making a business impact. Okay, number 3 on the list from McKinsey. If you are a team leader, don't stand in the way of progress. So teams can have the best of intentions, but if the leader is not open to change, the likelihood that team health improves drops dramatically. We have seen leaders who simply can't shift away from a command and control mindset to a collaborative approach without some sort of intervention. Now, they talk about coaching being really handy here. I think this is really useful. You can use those Belbin reports and other tools and methods as well to coach the leaders individually so they understand that they need to step away. But going back to that last comment that Vicky made, is that actually, if the leaders can see the benefits of these, if they have got more time spent doing something else rather than people moaning and having to sort out issues within the team, if people are talking to one another, they have a contract, it's reinforcing the reason why you're doing it. And in fact, the team leader can see, oh, it's okay. It's okay. They can work without me. So really working hard on that contract, both as a team and as an individual, is quite crucial here. I'd also say with the team leader, don't stand in the way of progress by thinking that everybody is like you. There's a quote by Richard Branson, and he says, if you want everybody to do their best work, treat them how you would like to be treated. And of course, that's not quite right, is it? Because you shouldn't treat people how you want to be treated. If I treated everybody in our team how I wanted to be treated, I don't think there'd be many people left by the end of the week. Vicky's actually laughing. She's going, no, you're right. Because we need to treat people how they want to be treated. And again, by doing the homework first and getting that data, what the team leader can do is realize the difference in the strength within their team and to be able to lead accordingly, being able to adapt to make sure that the most is being, they're getting the most out of each team member. And that starts to build what we call psychological safety. That starts to build the trust within the team. And for that to happen, it's more likely that the team leader is able to take a step back because they feel confident that there's enough understanding, ownership within the team for it to continue without them constantly breathing down their collar. Is there anything you'd like to put or add to here, Vicky?
Just to say that they mentioned earlier in the article that the other thing was that leaders tended to have a very rosy view of team effectiveness, much more so than the people within the team. So perhaps the first obstacle is recognizing, things might not be as you would like them to be, and really, as we said, doing the due diligence, going back to the beginning, this is a science. This is something that you can analyze and decide on how to improve. Going back to those key drivers, there is evidence here, and I think as leaders, we have to be willing to acknowledge that and really to take stock of how things are in the team, not just assume everything's fine and sort of carry on as normal, because there's a clear difference in the way that leaders understood what was going on in the team. And again, going back to those observer assessments as well, do you know the strengths that are in your team? Do you have the tools that you need for progress? Before we get to how you get there, you've got to acknowledge the issues and find the right way to find out that information, haven't you?
No, absolutely. This is, again, looking at the case study from the energy company. One thing they found is that once they did it once, they realized they needed to keep doing it. And we've been working with them for a while now. And the leadership team suddenly became proud to talk about their roles. I think one of the aha moments was that they were talking about their allowable weaknesses with pride because they were quite able to talk confidently about their strengths. It had allowed them to talk and to really use their strengths and their weaknesses. Interesting, they had used another tool before. They came to us because that tool didn't work, and the other tool, it wasn't a team tool. It was a personality tool, and it wasn't able to give them this amount of insight about their behaviours, because obviously you can't feed back on somebody's personality because that's who they are. What we're looking at is what you do. How does it manifest itself in terms of its behaviour? So they're saying that obviously before Belbin, this wouldn't have happened. The leaders wouldn't have felt so confident talking about themselves, and a whole new level of conversation has happened. I like this bit. The director is enthused and wants the same experience for his team as others have had. We can't wait to get going. The positive impact on those leaders have meant that they said, right, this is great, but we need to cascade it down. We need to ensure that everybody is able to benefit from this. Okay, so we've had 3 so far about building teams that are greater than the sum of the parts. We've had take a hard look in the mirror, making the changes stick, and if you are a team leader, don't stand in the way of progress. Right, Fiona, brilliant. We've got a question. We don't have any monitor evaluators in our teams. I feel it's holding us back, but we can't recruit to fill this role. Any ideas? That's a really good question. And it happens, doesn't it, is that you have one role which is really conspicuous in its absence. And then with the monitor evaluator, I'm just going to guess here because we can't have a conversation, Fiona, but is it holding you up because you're all concerned that you may be making the wrong decision? Do you feel it's holding you up because you're debating too much and you haven't got somebody who is saying, no, this is the way forward? Monitor evaluators are the ones that take the emotion out of the decision-making process. They weigh up the pros and the cons. They look at everything very logically, quite shrewdly, and they always make the right decision. So if you don't have that behavior, it can mean sometimes that the team is worried, especially if they're very conscious of that. They're worried that the decision they've made isn't the right one. If you can't recruit in, it's about understanding, do you have anybody who has the monitor evaluator role perhaps in the middle of their profile? Do you have somebody whose observers are seeing high monitor evaluator? They may not see it in themselves, but maybe others do. Go back to the data and see where is the monitor evaluator within the team. And then it's not a case of going and off you go. What we then need to do is allow some training, some discussion with the team. It's called making a bit of a team role sacrifice. You're sacrificing your other strengths, so another one comes out for the good of the team. And it's supporting that person to be able to do that. Alternatively, it could be something that you want to share between 2 or maybe 3 people, and they actively put their monitor evaluator hat on and take that role. With the monitor evaluator, you don't need it all of the time. So it's not that they are always going to have to play that role, but only playing it when the decision making is crucial. So it's not something somebody has to do 100% of the time. So yeah, look at the data, see where the monitor evaluator is within, and then give permission, and also perhaps share that role. I hope that helps. Vicky, would you add anything there?
And just to say that when Meredith talks about this in management teams, he talks about the importance of, if someone is making a team role sacrifice, that, as Jo says, the rest of the team know about it, because it's a difficult thing to do long term. It's a strain potentially on that person or group of people, and so it's having that awareness in the team that it can't necessarily be a forever solution, but it's something that the team needs for now, and that it's, that there's some energy going into that, cultivating that, bringing it up from the middle of the profile, and that's tough. So it's having that understanding in the team rather than just expecting someone to step in and do it. I think just making sure that others are aware we need this. We're kind of calling on this person to do it, and we need to sort of support that.
Thank you. If you need anything else, Fiona, you know where we are. I'd be delighted to talk you through. Okay, so the last one, number 4 on the list for McKinsey, is embed team effectiveness in the organisation's DNA. They say the road to better team effectiveness is a continuous journey. We've discussed that, both for the teams themselves and the organisation at large. For a team effectiveness approach to have a scalable impact, it needs to be systematically embedded into the structural processes of the organisation. That allows it to be used not just with a few teams, but ideally with every team. And they say one way of doing this is by using a train the trainer method to cascade from an initial set of high value teams to hundreds of teams. So really what we were talking about a little bit just now is that the leadership team found it so incredibly successful that they now want all of their teams to go through the same process. I've just got the word gym written down here, Vicky.
Yeah, so a comment I saw on LinkedIn actually about someone saying that they don't offer one-off workshops anymore, because it's basically like going to the gym once and then saying, "Brilliant, that's it. Now I'm fit. Job done."
Oh, isn't that how it
Um,
works? That's how I use it.
unfortunately, um, unfortunately not. And it's the same here, isn't it? There's no quick fix. Going back to that myth at the beginning. Um, there's no kind of easy solution. We know that if we want something to stick, whatever it might be in life, we have to work at it. And so yeah, making sure that it's sort of threaded through conversations, that it's a practical language that people are going to be able to use every day. You know, shall we ME that? I need someone to CF this, you know, so to computer finishes, so to check the details, or I need an ME, like we've just been talking about, someone who's going to take that strategic overview. So yeah, having that sort of language, accessible language that people can use. Otherwise, it's just something for a day, isn't it?
Absolutely. And also, a gym is full of lots and lots of different types of equipment. You don't just go there and go on the running machine. That's all I need. I only need the running machine, and it's going to help with my legs, my arms. It's going to help me do this. It doesn't. You know that's a different type to perhaps doing a bench press. So when we go to the gym on a regular basis to get fit, we need to make sure we're using the right tools to get the right results. And very often we find that people are looking to use something throughout the organization, but they're using perhaps just one tool and they're saying it fits everywhere. And then they wonder why it doesn't work. It's because you're going to the gym brilliantly. You may be embedding it throughout, great, but you're on the wrong machine. So what we need to try and find is how, if you're going to embed team effectiveness into an organization's DNA, you need a team tool. You need to be going to the team piece of equipment to be able to do that. And Belbin is the team tool. You know, we showed it with the data, with all of the research, with all of the outcomes. You know, for many years, the reason why organisations go to Belbin is because it works. It works, but it's the right tool. But it looks sort of may seem quite simple, but actually, it's not always easy. You need to keep working at it, don't you, Vicky? I think it's something that's quite important there. It's not just a quick magic wand and off you go. It's something you have to keep working at.
Absolutely.
And this is why we need to be trained. And this is what they talk about in the McKinsey article. They talk about a bank. Actually, they wanted to scale team effectiveness to more than 200 teams. And the bank started by having members of the HR organisation first of all experience this team programme themselves, and they were guided by experienced facilitators. Then they observed and shadowed the facilitators, and then they brought additional teams through the programme. So they used really much a train the trainer approach. And this is kind of what we talk about at Belbin. Don't worry, we don't want to be involved in all of your workshops, but we want to give you the skills, the knowledge, the abilities to be able to make that difference, to make your teams more effective and sustainably effective. So once you realise that need, you can become Belbin accredited. You can learn everything there is about the tool, which is Belbin, which is the team tool. We give you ongoing support here in the office, and then you become the team expert, and you can then be that wonderful, I don't know, but what word have we got? A guru. I think, what do they call it in Belbin, India? They call everybody Belbin ninjas within your organization. And you can be the ones responsible for really making that sustainable behavioral change, which leads to teams becoming more effective and having a real effect on those business results. I talk about that with the report support, is that straight after this we have a accredited practitioners meetup where we're all going to join a call for about an hour and talk about different ways we need to do things, listen to each other, share experiences to ensure that we're all constantly learning.
Because it's a good point. It's about making your own learning stick as well, isn't it?
Yes,
when you
absolutely.
when you become accredited and you're kind of armed with all this wonderful information, it needs to be. We know that, don't we? That when people attend courses, we only retain information for a certain amount of time. If we're not using it, it needs to be sort of refreshed and renewed. We need to have lots of ideas about how to implement things, how to get around problems like the one we were just talking about. So it's so useful to kind of share experiences, I think, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so we're getting towards the end of the webinar here. And we started by looking at the McKinsey, well, we've looked at the McKinsey article throughout the webinar, and we started looking at different types of teams, whether or not, their level of interdependence, whether or not you're cycling, what sort of teams are you, which is really important to look at, and the drivers behind those. But then looking at what are those 4 important components to ensure that the team is greater than the sum of its parts. What do we need to do to make sure that we have sustainable behaviour change for real teams? We're looking here about getting into your DNA, but we've talked about, obviously, getting that data to start with, making sure that something is really embedded, and also the role of the leader. I'm just going to finish here. Again, back at the conference we had last year, Deepak presented with us the work that they do at Tata, which I don't know if you've heard of them. They're quite a large organisation, and they have used Belbin now for over 6 years as part of their business excellence model. And I think I'm just going to read it out loud because I think it's quite poignant, because it's really summing up everything we've spoken about so far. They've introduced Belbin and people have adapted to it and internalized it, and the outcomes are being seen. It's been 6 years now, and if it had not worked, it would have been scrapped within a year. It is certainly providing value. Belbin is something which is very simple to do, to administer, and something which remains with you on a continual basis, not just as an individual level, but as a team level. That's sustainable behaviour change for real teams. To continue the conversation, please do contact us. As we know, and as Meredith always said, nobody is perfect, but a team can be. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you found it interesting, and we will be sending out an email with all of the links to everything that we have quoted for you to be able to digest and to be able to take that learning into the work that you do with your teams. And of course, if you would like some further information on the Belbin accreditation, please do get in touch. Oh, and now if anybody has any questions, that would be great. Thank you very much. Okay, what can I do if a team role analysis result shows unbalanced team composition, very low scores across some team roles? Well, I'll go first, then Vicky's going to have her piece as well. So it really depends on what the team is there to do. We should always look at a team with the team's objective in mind. Some team roles are needed more than others, depending on that objective. And obviously, not all team roles are required at all times. So we need to really put that within that context. So, for example, it could be that you have really low plant in a team. One would then say, does that matter? What is the impact of not having any plant? Do we have, are we meant to be looking for things different? Are we looking for new? Are we looking for, if we've got some problems that need to be solved? If we don't, that might be okay. as long as we're aware of that. So the context is really important. And then to go on to the next thing, is it within the team? As we were saying with the monitor evaluator question earlier, could some people be developed into those roles? Behaviour isn't fixed. We can change. It could be a growth opportunity for people within the team to play different roles, as long as they are supported from within and supported with the team leader as well. So there are lots of ways that we can look at that. Anything else you'd like to add, Vicky?
I think just to echo what you said about the purpose, and I think, you know, a picky point, but again, in management teams, Meredith talks about having access to all the roles. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to, as Jo says, have everybody have all those roles represented all the time. But having access, well, that could mean you know, external contractors providing a certain role. It could be that it comes from within the organization. If you have good enough sort of Belbin intelligence in your organization, can you borrow that contribution from elsewhere when you need it? And if you decide that those things aren't needed, I think just to be aware of what that means for the team. So, for example, you've got, I can't remember all the roles you had, but if you've got the slightly lower resource investigator, is there a risk of the team sort of being too insular? So I think not necessarily having to balance everything out, as Jo says, depending on the purpose, but just being aware of what those strengths mean, but also what the potential drawbacks are for the team.
Thank you. I hope that's answered your question. Okay. Hello, Rob. Interesting to see the different types of teams, but is one more preferable than another? And is it possible to change the archetype of the team? Do you know, it was really interesting, wasn't it, looking at those three different types, Rob? I agree, and hopefully you've got the paper. You came up in conversation, actually, because we were working out which one of those teams would be a more agile team. And we decided that, hang on, let me find it in my paper here, that perhaps the relay team sort of showed more of an agile way of working, where you do something, you pass it on, you do something, you pass it on. We weren't 100% sure yet, because I don't think anything really fits 100% neatly into each of these models. Can they change? I think if the objectives of the team changes, then they should change. I think if we're saying that this is the type of team that we are, and it will be like that forever, well, if nothing else changes around you and it works, then why? But I think what we need to make sure is we have that flexibility. I don't know if they analysed it though. So Rob will go and have a look at the data again, and we'll find out what McKinsey did. Vicky, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, just I suppose to come back to the idea of that people need to agree on which type it is in order for them, you know, to have a base to work from. But I suppose in terms of is one preferable, I'm not sure about that, but I can see that, you know, in terms of those drivers of performance, the relay and the rowing teams, they have those the additional sort of differentiating drivers that come in, the belonging and role definition, and for the relay team, the commitment, goals, and recognition. So I suppose there are more of those factors to take into account and kind of measure the team's performance against. I don't know whether that's necessarily better or worse, but there might be more complicating factors, I suppose.
Yeah. I think it's something I'd like to look at in more detail, Rob. So thank you so much for the question. Do team behaviours have anything to do with personality type? Yes. So your personality type is who you are. So you may have measured that using Raymond Cattell's 15PF or by MBTI, the personality tools, insights, anything like that. You may be measuring who you are. And of course, this does have a correlation to what you do, which is your behaviour. So one is a noun, one is a verb, it's a doing word. But there are other factors at play. So when you're looking at your behavior, you also have things like your values, your motivations, your experiences, working within different cultures with different managers. All of these things, the more you understand about yourself, your role learning, your intelligence, your IQ, your EQ, all of these things have a bearing on your behavior. as does your personality. So there isn't a direct, this is my personality, this is the way I behave. There is a lot more involved there. So that's a really good question, because I think that's one of the reasons sometimes some of these things fail, some of these team interventions fail, is people have used a personality tool and not a team tool which is looking at behaviour. It's really important that you use the right tool for the right job. And if it's teams, obviously Belbin comes in there looking at your behaviour, not your personality. Okay,
Yeah, and
Tracy's
also
put a really
just
useful link there. Thank you.
as we're talking about change, obviously behavior is more changeable. You know, your personality. We were talking earlier about the mirror. It's difficult for other people to sort of chime in on, you know, what your what's something that's fairly internal, your personality type. But behavior, you know, we can observe that. We can see if you're trying to play more of a coordinator role, the team can help you evaluate whether you're doing that successfully, whether you're growing in that role. So if we're looking at behavior change, we need a behavior tool. And we need to be really clear, I think, and I'm talking sort of industry wide, about when we're talking about personality and when we're talking about behavior, watch out for you know, what different instruments are doing, because if you're talking about behavior, that's something that can be sort of changed, and we can perhaps not sort of from one extreme to the other, but we do see people sort of growing in roles. We see people, you know, they might be, their observers might see talents and strengths that they themselves don't see, and so we can see that sort of growth. Whereas I'd say, you know, with personality, we tend to think of that as something that's not entirely, but it's more fixed than behaviour.
Thank you. I just say Tracy's put a very useful link in the comments for you there, which should help answer the question more fully. But yes, they are two different things. I'd also say when you're looking at these things, it's really useful as well to make sure you're looking at a tool which is work-based. So when you fill in the self-perception inventory of Belbin, it says when I am working in a team, it contextualizes it. It's saying when you're working with others. So you understand what it's asking for. You know, you understand that it's a work-based tool. Some tools are just very generic. You know, do you prefer parties or not going to parties? And you know, well, a work party or a party with people I like. You know, it's really, I don't know. There's too much going on there. So it's nice to, well, not nice. It's really important. It's critical to ensure that the tool that you're using is a work-based tool, and it's talking about that situation in a work scenario as well. Okay, I think we've just covered everything and more, Vicky. I believe we have. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. For those of you who have signed up for the Belbin Accredited Practitioners webinar, it starts at 4. I'm going to go and get a bit of lunch, a bit of coffee, and be straight back to talk more. So thank you so much. Please look out for the next email, which will have all the details of this webinar on it. And then we will be sorting out the next 4 webinars, the next 4 months worth, and we will get that to you as well. So you can sign up ready and join us and continue your learning. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.